Hi, I'm Wilson Morales. I'm the editor-in-chief of BlackFilmAndTV.com. Today, I'm coming to you virtually from the Macro Lodge at Sundance, where we're going to be discussing the film Alice, which is done by Krystin Ver Linden, who's making her director debut, produced by Peter Lawson, and starring the one and only Keke Palmer. Welcome, everybody.
Hey.
So, right
Hi,
off the
how are
bat,
you?
I was,
Hey.
hey, so, this is a film that's playing in a narrative feature competition. And for you, Kristen, from what I've read, you've written other scripts, but this is the first one off the ground. So talk about coming up with this concept and bringing Peter along.
We brought each other along. So I read articles. My mom had sent me, you know how mothers are when you're a writer and they want to send you everything or pitch you ideas. And I usually would ignore them. But in this circumstance, she sent me a bunch of amazing articles that her friend at Berkeley had sent her. And once I read the first article, I had to do a deep dive into all of these heartbreaking but inspiring stories about African Americans who were born onto plantations and discovered that it was actually the 60s. And there was a whole wave in the 1960s specifically of this happening. And it's the stories were too unbelievable to not write about. And the reason I chose this as my directorial debut, because it spoke to everything inside of me. And Alice, the character, felt so cathartic for so many reasons. And Keke took it to a whole nother level, but it was about a woman finding her voice and finding her place in the world and speaking up for herself and empowerment and believing in yourself and not letting anyone define you by their terms, but on your own terms. And that was the reason I had to write it. And then Peter read it and he embraced the story and didn't try to change it. He added to it and enhanced it. And everybody that was a part of this film only enhanced what was there and took it to a level I couldn't have even dreamed of.
Peter, obviously, you're a producer who's had a range of films from Spotlight to John Wick, and I'm sure people pitch you all the time with things they want you to come on board and produce. What was it about this script that you saw and within Kristen that said, okay, I can come on board, let's make a few changes, and let's make it happen?
I've been a fan of her writing for a long time, and when I got this script, her and I had a really good rapport right off the bat, and we started talking about kind of what this film was, what this meant to her. And initially, she was not pitching herself to direct it, and as we kind of got into the script a bit more, I was like, you are so ready and right to do this. So we jumped on the journey, and then Keke kind of completed in common the rest of the story. But she, as most writers, I feel like are such great storytellers, obviously, and she's so close to material, and just her film knowledge from the years, working with different folks, and just had such an amazing, kind of vision for this. I mean, as we would talk about it, she would reference all these great, old filmmakers and specific shots, and so I would have been silly not to, embrace her as the director.
Keke, I've watched you for a long time. I've seen you grow from TV shows to hosting shows to films and different projects. Here, this is another level of your career stepping up in terms of your acting skills. What was it about this script that said, I can come on board on this, I want to play this character?
Well, as a Black woman, I'm very, very proud of my history. I couldn't be any prouder. I think a lot of times when we approach the topic of our history or we see art pieces or films based off of it, it often can come from the perspective of making us feel victimized, not necessarily empowered. You find yourself leaving the theater or leaving the film kind of feeling bad, you know what I mean, coming out of it. And that's not all the time, but that's definitely generally speaking, a lot of the times when we revisit this harsh past of Black American history. But when I read Krystin's script, it was the opposite. I thought the way that she approached the topic was so poetic, and that there were so many metaphors that were representative to today and the way we want to move forward in our thinking and changing the things that we want to change. And then it also had this, lighthearted element to it as well. To some degree, the way that the dialogue was written and the relationship between Alice and Common's character, Frank. And I felt like, this is the kind of story revisiting our history that I would want to be a part of, because I finished the script and I did not feel tired or exhausted, but I felt the way that I truly do feel, which is, yeah, I'm powerful, I'm resilient because of my ancestry. And yes, only the strong survived. And yes, I am Alice, that we are Alice, and we all have to continue. And, it empowered me. And I think that's what I want to feel when I look on the past of what my ancestors experienced that got me here today. And I felt like she nailed that.
Mm-hmm. There was a film. At first, when I thought about the concept, the storyline, I'm thinking like, okay, this is something that is being put together. And then a few years ago, we had a film that had similar themes. So it tells you when you're telling me that these are things that are happening and continue to happen, we just don't know about until they come to light. What did you want to, you have to credit the script supervisor on this one to make sure you have everything right when you're telling a period piece. Because as I'm watching this, and as Alice walks into 1973 and all the stuff that we see in there, from the music and the television shows and movie, I kept saying to myself, and I had to Google, is like, is this the right year? Did they get the right year? We know it's in the 70s. Did this happen during it? Or they're coming out of seeing coffee? What year was this? So Krystin, can you talk about making sure you had everything? It's one thing when you're setting it up in the Georgia plantation, but once you walk into the real world and you're centering it on the 70s, you have to get it right because folks will be looking out for that stuff.
I love the 70s. And so when you are writing the story, I was constantly making sure the lines added up, but I was also writing to Diana Ross and her album from 1973. So it was almost like that moment in time, I set Alice purposefully in the story in the 70s, post-civil rights era, so that she could reflect on that moment. But I chose 1973 because I was like, that was when this came out, that was when that came out, that's when this show was on, that's when that show was on. So the timeline preceded the rest, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And in between you and Peter, did you guys talk about what's the common theme? We want this to make this about woman empowerment. We don't want this to make this about a revenge thriller. There's a lot you can take out of this movie as far as where is it going to go. So at the end, did you guys come across a common theme that when people see this is how they're going to describe the movie?
I mean, I think, Keke talked about this a little bit. It's this amazing transformation in this character and this woman, and the fact that she can come out of this horrific experience with a new sense of life and empowerment. And I think that's what kind of drew me to the script originally, and in Kristin's vision and Keke's performance is, like she said, you come out with a sense of hope at the end of the film from what this woman has gone through and kind of stood for. So that's what I believe that the audience will come out with.
And to Peter's point, I mean, there are a lot of different things that I think everyone's going to take from Alice, or I would hope that they would. Every time that I watch it, there's something new that I take from it. But I think specifically for me as a millennial, what I would hope that the millennials take from it is that it's not always sad when you look at the past. It does not have to be a sense of feeling, dejected or victimized, but it's a place where you can find hope and positivity for the future. Because here you have in the movie Alice's character who actually has, and I don't want to tell the movie, but who actually has more hope than someone like Frank that has gone through seeing, the civil rights era and seeing all of the hardships and all the losses that happened at that time. And for me, the poetry, what that reminds me of is that, yeah, things don't just go snap and everything is great. That's not how it happens. But if Alice could do it, if our ancestors could keep pushing forward with what they had to deal with, I can show up and vote when I need to vote. I can do what I need to do to make what I need. I can do my part. And to me, that's what I felt. You know, when I read it, when I watched it, it empowered me to say, oh, okay, I'm showing up. And that this is what we're to look at the past for resilience, for encouragement, for empowerment, and to remind us that, yo, if they could have gotten through that, then I can get through anything.
Well, just to add to that real quick, when we were shooting, sorry, Kristen, you know, Keke and Common had just come off literally, you know, working with the Biden campaign, and we were, you know, shooting in the Deep South with a very, you know, contentious election. So as we're making this movie, a lot of the parallels were happening right in front of our face. So I think, you know, that's another thing I think we can take from this, that, you know, the things have changed for the better, and things have not. So I think it's looking, you know, into the kind of parallels there that I think are really interesting and make it feel a bit more contemporary.
And just really quick, for me, it was really important for little girls to have someone to look up to in film, because I didn't have very many role models in film, and I put them in the movie, like Diana Ross and Pam Grier, and I want Alice to be one of those people for little girls watching movies and coming up and seeing like, oh, you know, this is someone that gives me confidence and gives me strength, because that's where I found a lot of my strength was in film and characters.
That's one of the things I noticed, is that Alice's character was always a strong woman. You know, although there's moments where she's yelling, you know, it almost seemed like we caught her in the middle of something, like ready to break out. You know, and she was waiting and biding her time. You know, so as you were writing this character, you know, when people get an idea that they're seeing a slave film, there's always that point where we're saying, at what point are we going to see something that's terrible? You know, we don't want to see torture porn, you know, when it comes to these things anymore. You know, so then, although there is something in it, but not so much, you know, it's the character of Alice, as you mentioned, you know, she's right up there with the Diana Ross and a Pam Grier, you know, that when we see her make that transformation into a different person, you know, did you want to have her be that way from get-go?
Yeah, I mean, I could only base it on the women that I was raised by, the strong Black women like my mother and my grandmother, who came up during the civil rights era and fought for the cause, you know, and had her whole journey. So I based it on the women in my life that empowered me and brought me to this point, and also just heroes growing up. So it wasn't even a conscious thing. It was more a stream of consciousness, organic thing of, you know, it wasn't a conscious thought.
And then there's the character of Frank, played by Common. You know, he's this, as they say, delusioned former Black Panther, I guess, or former activist, who's still also trying to find his way in life. How did you want to define him, and then have his character come along with Alice, where the two of them find common ground, and not only fighting to gain their own strength, but helping each other out? Peter, you worked with Common before.
Actually, no, I have. This is the first time we worked together. I've been a big fan of his for a long time. You know, obviously as a musician, and I think as an actor, he's had some great performances. But there was a kind of quiet strength to him in this movie that was really great. And you know, and Kristen and I and Keke were kind of talking when we were casting this role, like, you know, if you were this woman coming out into this new world, who would you want to save you? And I think everyone's hand went. I was like, yeah, Common to be the guy. And you know, the two of them together are fantastic. I think, you know, Keke definitely brought something special out of Common's performance, and vice versa. But you know, there's this kind of quiet strength to him that is kind of undeniable, and there's just such a genuine goodness to him as a person and as an actor that he just kind of embodied that role in such a great way.
And then when you have Johnny Lee Miller, sometimes when you watch these movies, whether it be Django or Jane or 12 Years a Slave, there's always going to be that character. So how did you want to make Johnny's character different from what we've seen of other slave owners in previous films?
For me, it was really important to be subversive when it came to all of the stereotypes about those types of movies. And the first one for me, and something that Johnny and I worked on together, was a man that embodied what not only the property had become, 100 years later, it's falling apart, it's weak, the floorboards are, crumbling. I wanted a man that was sickly and wasn't physically, you could look at him and know he wasn't a strong physical person. And that to me just visually meant so much, because it's like the power that one man can have over a group of people that could physically overtake him, and yet they don't. And so there's a whole conversation about that, but it was more or less him embodying what the property had become too. And it wasn't this, the cliche of like, this is a strapping young healthy person, but it was like a sick person inside and outside. So,
and to add to that, I think a big thing here for me that I loved about the script is a lot of times when we see that slave master character, it's just like, oh, they're just evil and it's just raw, and it's just, it kind of is like it's just the same type. I would generally say. And with this, I feel like the approach that Krystin came from was really so historical in the reality of the tradition, that this is somebody that truly believes that they are superior. This is somebody that truly, they don't think they're doing nothing wrong. Like this is who I'm supposed to be. This is who you're supposed to be. And to me, that's so, again, the poetry of how it parallels today is so true, because that is so much of what goes on now, is that these people are holding on to these old traditions that never should have been a tradition to begin with, that they stand by. To this day, we're taking down statues that represent heartache for some and triumph for others. And that to me is just so, it's so unique, because it was not what it usually is, which is just, oh, this is just evil. It was really like, let me explain to you how the evil was created. Let me explain and show how the mental trauma and disillusions have started and began and sustained. And that to me was definitely a unique perspective, because I think it's the reality.
Keke, let me ask you, you mentioned earlier you're a millennial, so how much research did you do into this, especially when you're dealing with the 70s? And we all like to say we saw Pan Greer films. We all like to say we all heard Diana Ross music, but not everyone has done it before. So, so for you, when you're reading the script and you see what's on the background, did you take the time to listen to those musics, to see those movies, to follow up on who Angela Davis is?
Yes, absolutely. Well, my parents, when it comes to people like Angela Davis, or just like thinking about, as social activists and stuff like that, Muhammad Ali, Ruby Dee, Ozzie Davis, all these kinds of people, my family is very much so like that. My dad, they used to always say that he was like Michael from Good Times, because he was very much like, hey, and did you know? So I grew up with that energy in my life, and the Motown era and the music aspect, absolutely. But I did not see a lot of Pam Grier films. I did not see a lot of those particular references when it came to Black exploitation films, I guess you call it. So Krystin really had me do that research. So I absolutely did that research beforehand. But it's interesting, because though Alice is an ode to that, Alice is not that. Right? Because I was ready to come through that door and be like, oh, now get down, you jive turkey. But Krystin was like, Alice doesn't know those words. She does not know the slang. You cannot come in here and do this. So, obviously there were elements of that we brought to it, but we still wanted to maintain that Alice is a grounded film. You know what I mean? Even though this is such an out of the box scenario that, unfortunately is more realistic and valid than one would think, we wanted to make sure that it remained grounded, and that we didn't take it too much out of it at the same time. So yes, I did my research, but I did also want to try to make sure that I made it my own.
Mm-hmm. Krystin, this is your first film directing. It's off the ground. It's going to be played at Sundance. I'm sure that feeling of excitement was there when you got the word, email, or by phone call that it was going by Sundance. But throughout the process of making this film, and before people get to see it or people get to talk about it, because that's a whole different aspect. What did you learn in the process as a filmmaker that before anybody else puts the word out of what this movie's about, whether it's good or bad, that you can take on to your next project?
Woo. Well, the biggest thing is if I can make a movie with a mask on and have that same connection with my actors and do everything distance, the next one will be way easier. COVID was the biggest hurdle for me as a filmmaker. But everything, I think, when you go into any situation in life, whether it's directing or anything, every situation is always new, and you can take away just even the connections and just the life experience of being in Georgia during probably the most important presidential election of our time so far, knock on wood. But it was the whole scenario. It was like the perfect storm of COVID and election and what we're doing and what we're saying and masks and only eyes. It was a whole thing. So to me, the next film will be, I think there won't be all of those hurdles.
Yeah, here's the thing. You never know when a film's being shot, and so when it comes out, you don't know how long it's been in the can and so forth. So obviously, you're mentioning it was shot during COVID, and for you and Peter, as as producers as well as Keke, what were the protocols that were taken, and were there any challenges in terms of the limitations of what you can do, in terms of making this movie, or were you able to get it done during this time period with the way you wanted it?
I give major props
to answer.
I was literally just gonna say I give major props to Peter, because I think Krystin and I, we were just doing what we were told, trying to be on point and not be the ones to make us end up having to, not be able to film. But he's the one who had to really put the fires out.
Yep.
I mean, we had initially planned to start shooting last summer, and we were about 10 days out from traveling Keke and Common and Jomini, and we were going to be one of the first movies to shoot in the middle of COVID. We had a kind of short window, and the state of Georgia weren't going to shut us down, but I was not going to let cast and crew go down, so we had to kind of put a pause, regroup, and then come back in the fall, which was kind of right before the election. We ate, took a pretty significant hit financially just from the stop, from the extra COVID protocols. We had to deliver a 68-page plan to SAG and all the unions, and we had a spotlight on us. Like, we were still one of the first movies to go shoot in the middle of all this. It's hard enough making an indie film on a good day. I've been there before, and then we have Krystin as a first-time director, and we also have COVID, everyone getting tested 4 or 5 days a week, trying to be safe, and then you have this kind of pressure cooker of an election. We're in the deep South, shooting on a plantation with rallies going on next door to us. A lot of distractions, and it was pretty amazing that between Krystin and Keke, Common, Johnny, everybody kind of came together, and it was hard. It's to kind of follow all of these rules that you need to do to be safe in the middle of all this, and to get it done and in the can is pretty amazing. And then I'm super proud of what Krystin and Keke and everyone has done, and to do it in the middle of that kind of complete firestorm is crazy. I never want to do it again.
I say this, he brought so much amazing energy that it was hard to worry, if that makes sense. She'd come in and you're like, okay, yeah, everything's gonna be okay.
With the music, yeah, with the music you got in there, obviously when you throw on music that we're familiar with, there's always the rights. Was there a choice of the music you wanted to play with, or what you could afford?
Two things, and then I'll let Peter answer this. When I'm writing, I write in the music, and then it was just a hope that we could afford the music, and then Peter worked some magic, and Common worked some
Yeah,
magic.
an amazing music supervisor on the movie, Anne Klein, who I've worked with before, who's like, the magic woman, one of the best ever. And then, Kristen had written, of course, some of the most expensive, amazing songs in her script. And so I said, look, you're not gonna have all of those, but I'll give you some of them. And so we were very lucky to, have Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Lynn Collins, and then we were having early conversations about who was going to do the composing, and Common came and pitched us, said, hey, I've been really interested in wanting to do this for a while. What do you think? And we're like, really? Sure, of course. Like, this would be amazing.
Free?
Yeah, no. But he had a lot of creative freedom that I think a lot of composers probably wouldn't have on, doing their first composition for a picture. And I think what he and Patrick Warren and the rest of the guys had put together was pretty amazing, and very, very different stylistically than you would think for a movie like this, especially the first section, which is on the plantation. I think they did an amazing job. So that mixed with, the real 70s sound with these kind of famous artists, I think it was very cool. But, Kristen was great in being open to, looking at other tracks. But, we also wanted, for Alice's transformation in this era, and Common trying to figure out, is she really saying what she's saying here? You needed tracks that everyone could relate to and remember.
Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, Keke, when you do a role like this, are you able to shed it off once you leave the set and, just continue with life? Or does a part of this stick with you, especially with the subject matter at hand?
1000% it sticks with me. 1000%. Especially as I've gotten older, when it comes to drama, it really sticks with me. And I used to, as a kid, hear that people would take breaks and things like that. And I never really understood why, but as I've gotten older, I do, because your emotions are really in it. You cannot fake a performance. Like, obviously you can manipulate your emotions and things, but your emotions are still in it. Your emotions are still responding in that moment, in that time. And I just remember so vividly when we finished this film and we're getting back from Savannah and I'm in California, not California, but New York. And I was in my house and I started looking around. I just started to cry because I said, Alice didn't get to experience any of this. Alice doesn't get to have, happiness in my mind. And then immediately it switched and I said, well, actually, that's me. I get to be happy today. I get to feel empowered and have pride and grow and learn and be great and shine because of Alice, because of my answers. So then it flipped for me in that moment. And I thank obviously Kristen for that coming through clear for me, because right in the moment where I was about to get down about it, I really went back to the concept and the real spirit of the movie, and it gave me peace and helped me to pass through.
Well, congratulations to you all on making this happen during COVID, getting it done, getting into Sundance. Keke starring role, Kristen first film, Peter another good production. Keep it going.
Thank
Obviously,
you.
A lot of people will come out to support this movie. Let's wait to see what the writers say. Whether it's, you just don't pay attention to the write-ups. You just continue to do the work of what you want to do. We're out here to support. Wherever you guys are at, stay safe, stay warm, take care of yourselves.
Thank you.